Today, we live in one of the most divided political environments in all of our history, all of our United States history. I would say, um, maybe since the 1960s, the Jim Crow era, or perhaps even the Civil War. Um, it is certainly one of the most uh, tense, politically polarized um, environments that we've ever seen, for sure. Um, and of course, you always have anger and frustration when it comes to politics. Everybody has, you know, views if they're politically activated, politically motivated, active, um, and sometimes those views are held very strongly. Uh, People get very frustrated with seeing politicians that they disagree with the political system in general. Congress's approval rating is, I mean, it's something like 15, 17% maybe. It floats right around there. It's extremely low. Uh, People have a ton of distrust and a lot of frustration in the political system in general, and in in various policies and certain politicians and certain political parties, um, and the rhetoric, the political rhetoric that we see right now is at a very intense level, and the threat of political violence in this country is at a level that it hasn't been um, in quite some time. And you see, um, you see this environment of polarization, political polarization, growing, and you also see the dehumanization of certain individuals and certain groups of individuals. For example, the Republican Party. The Republican Party has been dehumanized by many on the far left, in the media, in the Democratic establishment, um, just in the general population, on college campuses. Conservative views and the Republican Party in general uh, are seen by many on the left as completely incompatible, as inhumane, basically, and many on the left are taught, uh, basically, to hate their political opponents, not to disagree with their ideas necessarily, and to provide alternative ideas, but that they should be discounted whole cloth because they are uh, essentially evil. And when you have this level of dehumanization, this intense political rhetoric, um, you're going to have people who get wound up from it. You're going to have people who are mentally unstable, and they could be brought over the edge, into doing something horrible, because of the political climate, because of the intense rhetoric, and because of everything else. So that actually, unfortunately, came to fruition on Wednesday. And this is from CNN. GOP House Whip Steve Scalise remains in critical condition after shooting at baseball practice. Representative Steve Scalise, a congressional staffer, a lobbyist, and a member of the Capitol Police Force, were shot Wednesday in Alexandria, Virginia, during a Republican's early morning practice ahead of a charity baseball game. Federal law enforcement officials identified the alleged shooter as James Hodgkinson, 66, of Belleville, Illinois, who died following a shootout with authorities. At least 6 people, including Scalise, the third-ranking member of House Republican leadership as the majority whip, were hospitalized. Scalise was in critical condition after suffering damage to internal organs, and his injuries will require additional operations, according to a MedStar Washington Hospital Center medical update late Wednesday. Quote, Congressman Steve Scalise sustained a single rifle shot to the left hip. The bullet traveled across his pelvis, fracturing bones, injuring internal organs, and causing severe bleeding, MedStar said in a statement put out by Scalise's office. Quote, he underwent immediate surgery and an additional procedure to stop bleeding. He has received multiple units of blood transfusion. His condition is critical and he will require additional operations. We will provide periodic updates. A congressional staffer, Zach Barth, was also shot in the leg and has since been released from the hospital. Matt Mika, a lobbyist for Tyson Foods and former congressional staffer, was also identified as one of those shot. He was out of surgery and in critical condition as of Wednesday afternoon, his family said in a statement. So this guy, Hodgkinson, he apparently traveled from Illinois to Virginia. It's not clear yet why he was actually in Virginia. There is some speculation that it was that there was actually a plot to do this, that it wasn't, just some sort of a random occurrence. He actually asked somebody there at the baseball field if it was Republicans or Democrats that were playing, and he was told that it was Republicans shortly before he went on his shooting spree. Of course, as far as I know, still Representative Scalise is still in critical condition, unfortunately. So, thoughts and prayers out to him, his family. It's a terrible situation. And the ironic thing about it is the fact that he was there is possibly the reason that everybody survived that night, or that event, because Representative Scalise is a member of congressional leadership. He's basically in the line of succession for the president, which means he gets his own private security detail, and because the Capitol Police, his private, his security detail was there, they were able to, actually eventually kill the assailant, and potentially, stopped all of them from being killed, or at least some of them. Again, Scalise is still in critical condition, and hopefully he can pull through. Kentucky Senator Rand Paul told CNN, quote, it would have been a massacre without the Capitol Police officers present. Quote, nobody would have survived without the Capitol Hill Police, Paul said on CNN. It would have been a massacre without them. So this guy, Hodgkinson, he was a few things we do know for sure about him at this point. He was a massive Bernie Sanders fan. He was a giant Bernie Sanders supporter. He was obviously very anti-Trump, very anti-Republican. He was a giant fan of Rachel Maddow. He watched, John Oliver and Trevor Noah. He was influenced by all of these people in the media that are very far to the left, and obviously influenced by Bernie Sanders, who you can't get much more leftist than that. And he was, seriously influenced by these politicians, by these people in the media, by the rhetoric, the absolutely vitriolic anti-Trump, anti-Republican hatred coming from the media, coming from Hollywood, coming out from the liberal college campuses, and of course coming from the Democrats themselves. And Bernie Sanders, to his credit, did actually condemned this, and he condemned it in quite strong terms. Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders said both in a statement and on the Senate floor that he learned the shooter had volunteered on his Democratic presidential campaign and that he condemned the shooting, quote, in the strongest possible terms. Quote, I have just been informed that the alleged shooter at the Republican baseball practice is someone who apparently volunteered on my presidential campaign, Sanders said. Quote, I am sickened by this despicable act. Let me be as clear as I can be. Violence of any kind is unacceptable in our society, and I condemn this action in the strongest possible terms, he said. Real change can only come about through non-violent action, and anything else runs against our most deeply held American values. So, good for Bernie Sanders for coming out and condemning it. Of course, as we'll get into here in a little bit, if he was actually put to his own standards, he actually would be to blame for this. And there are a lot of people who do want to blame Bernie Sanders, who want to blame the rhetoric of Bernie Sanders. I think it's dangerous, real dangerous territory when you start blaming people's rhetoric as divisive, as politically charged as it might be. It's still free speech unless somebody is actually literally calling for violence. You can't say that what they're doing is illegal. You can say it's immoral, but you can't say that it's illegal. And a lot of people are trying to blame Bernie Sanders himself. I don't think that's the right way to go. It's not Bernie Sanders' fault. As much as I disagree with Bernie Sanders politically, he didn't tell this guy to go kill anybody. This guy was a crazy person who went and killed people. With that being said, of course, the political climate, the vicious, vitriolic, anti-Trump, anti-Republican, hatred that the left has this monopoly on when it comes to Hollywood, the media, and college campuses in many cases, and of course the Democrats and the media, the mainstream media, work hand in hand in many ways. I mean, you look at an organization like CNN, for example. They are very far left. They don't ever do an honest job of accurately portraying conservative views. They don't even try. If they ever have a conservative on their show, it's for him to be a token and to be shouted down by the rest of the guests on the panel. And you see that all around, of course, with MSNBC, who Rachel Maddow, this guy, the shooter, was a big fan of. She goes on anti-Trump tirades on a daily basis, and you see this trend, in the media and all throughout, this trend from the left in general, the far left in general, to dehumanize Trump, to dehumanize Republicans, to not say that their policies are bad ideas, no, to say that they actually want to kill people. For example, that when they're trying to get rid of Obamacare, it's because they want to kill people, not because they think they have better solutions for healthcare. No, it's that they actually want to kill people. When Trump tries to cut back on the budget, they say that he wants to kill old people. And just all this crazy stuff. Throughout the campaign, you had Trump supporters compared to Nazis, Trump himself compared to Hitler multiple times. You had you had him labeled as racist, sexist, homophobic, bigoted, xenophobic, just every leftist term in the book. They threw it all at him. They threw the entire leftist book at him, and and it was all in an effort, essentially to dehumanize the guy, to dehumanize Republicans, in general. And that overall political climate, not anyone's individual's actions, absolutely helped to influence this guy and helped to influence this guy's action. And it needs to be toned down. It really does. It really needs to be toned down. And if it isn't, there is a real likelihood, a real possibility of an actual civil war breaking out in this country, which is something that that nobody should want. But I will say, as somebody who is a conservative, somebody who is on the right, you could say politically, also I have libertarian leanings. I am a proud gun owner. I know many other proud gun owners, and I think the odds don't look well for the political left if it comes down to a civil war. So obviously no one wants that to happen, but really, people on the far left are really pushing towards a very dangerous situation, and I think it really does need to be toned down, because it could lead to some real problems in the future, in the very near future. And so, to show how the left will come out and say that violence, the violent political rhetoric, they'll acknowledge it, but they will say that it is actually because of Republicans, not because of Democrats. And I think that the political climate is becoming more toxic because of actions taken by people on both sides of the aisle. I think the overall political climate has gotten more toxic in general. That being said, it's silly to sort of equate the kind of increase in rhetoric on the right side that could be taken as possibly advocating for violence, or being charged political rhetoric that could somehow lead to violence, and what is going on with the left. I don't think you can really compare the sort of like Milo Yiannopoulos, being banned from UC Berkeley because of violent Antifa protesters, and then Ann Coulter also being banned from coming to UC Berkeley because of the threats of violence from those very same people. Of course, you see the mock assassination of the president by, Kathy Griffin. You've just got the constant dehumanization of Trump from the Democrats. And you've just got this sort of toxic stew, this frothing toxic stew on the left that is encouraging violence at a level that you just can't compare to the sort of toxic rhetoric from the right. It's just silly to try to compare the two. Although, some things that are going on with the right are not good. And I'll get into that a little bit as well. But it's just two different levels of the same thing. Two completely different levels of the same thing. So this is from Yahoo News. New York Times issues correction to editorial linking Giffords shooting to Palin. Man, the New York Times has been having a rough time lately. Of course, Comey testified that the New York Times is in fact fake news. They ran a story in January or February, I believe, saying that Trump officials had multiple contacts with Russians. And of course, Comey said that article specifically was in fact fake news. And then the New York Times had to issue a retraction after that. And now it seems that they have to issue another correction, although for something completely unrelated. The New York Times has published an editor's note correcting an editorial that linked the 2011 shooting of Representative Gabby Giffords in Tucson, Arizona, to a fundraising email by former Alaska Governor Sarah Palin. The editorial drew complaints from many conservatives and Palin herself, who hinted she might explore legal action against the newspaper. Quote, an earlier version of this editorial incorrectly stated that a link existed between political incitement and the 2011 shooting of Representative Gabby Giffords. The note reads in its entirety, in fact, no such link was established. The Times did not offer an apology. So this lady, Gabby Giffords, was shot by this guy, Jared Lee Loughner, who was legitimately a crazy person. He's an actual, nut job. He's legitimately crazy. And they tried to say that because Sarah Palin had on her website at the time this map of different congressional districts and these sort of crosshairs over these different districts, saying that these are, different targets of basically blue areas that we want to take over, that we want to turn red, or just areas that we're targeting in general. And then, the media comes out, CNN included, all of them at the time, came out and said that because of that map, this crazy guy, Jared Lee Loughner, went and shot Gabby Giffords. Of course, it was complete nonsense. There was no link whatsoever. There was no evidence that he had even seen that map, let alone that it influenced him in any way to do something like that. The evidence was overwhelming, of course, that he was obsessed with Giffords for quite some time. And again, he was just a crazy person who did something terrible. But the New York Times, of course, pushes this story that they know full well is false, but they push it out there, and then, of course, are forced to actually issue a retraction. Quite embarrassing on their end. The editorial, published Wednesday, had drawn a distinction between the assault on Giffords and the shooting of White House Majority Whip Steve Scalise and 4 others at a Republican congressional baseball practice in Alexandria, Virginia, earlier in the day. The Times editorial board said that while Wednesday's attack by a left-wing activist was, quote, probably motivated by divisive political rhetoric, probably, there was a, quote, clear link in Giffords' case. Just absolute falsehood. Just completely fake. Complete fake news. Absolute fake news. The New York Times is fake news. And they knew it. They knew full well that that was fake. They knew that there was no link between that. Between Jared Lee Loughner and the map that Sarah Palin had on her website, for crying out loud. Quote, in 2011, when Jared Lee Loughner opened fire in a supermarket parking lot, grievously wounding Representative Gabby Giffords and killing 6 people, including a 9-year-old girl, the link to political incitement was clear, the editorial said. Quote, before the shooting, Sarah Palin's Political Action Committee circulated a map of the targeted electoral districts that put Mrs. Giffords and 19 other Democrats under stylized crosshairs. So the New York Times, puts out this story trying to, compare the 2011 incident, the shooting of Gabby Giffords, to the incident on Wednesday in the baseball practice, the baseball field that they were practicing in, the members of Congress getting ready for the annual baseball game between Republicans and Democrats. They tried to link it, and they even went so far as to say that the left-wing activist was, quote, he was only probably motivated by divisive political rhetoric, and said that there was a clear link in the Giffords case, when, again, there was zero evidence for that. And they knew full well when, on the other hand, you've got this Hodgkinson guy, or whatever the hell his name was, who had a very clear link to Rachel Maddow, for example, Bernie Sanders, for example, 2 people who spend most of their days spewing divisive political rhetoric. This guy was clearly motivated by these people, and that clearly helped him make the decision to do this. I'm not saying it's Rachel Maddow's fault. I'm not saying it's Bernie Sanders' fault. I'm saying that this guy was motivated by the very divisive, very venomous, very vitriolic, very hateful political rhetoric at times of people like Bernie Sanders and Rachel Maddow, directed towards President Trump and Republicans and conservatives in general. But you're not going to see the New York Times coming out and saying that that there is a clear link between anything, because they are complete partisan hack, fake news, propaganda outlets. It's a total joke. A complete and total joke. And it's worth noting that Bernie Sanders himself actually did a fundraiser off of this this event, and fundraised off of the notion that it was actually Sarah Palin's fault that Gabby Giffords was shot. Completely, utterly insane. And Sarah Palin is actually potentially going to sue the New York Times, and she may actually have a clear case for libel on that. And good for her if she can do that. And my next article here is from the American Thinker. So I just want to make clear, I do think the political climate is, the rhetoric is elevating to levels that cross the line on both sides of the aisle. Okay, so for example, you've got the case of Greg Gianforte, or I think that's how you pronounce his name, the guy who won the seat in the House of Representatives in Montana. He, of course, right before actually the election was held, this guy Gianforte was alleged to have actually body slammed a reporter, I believe, from The Guardian, and it turns out that he actually he did wind up doing that. He pled guilty to it or whatever, but he won the election anyways. And of course you had people in Congress on the Republican side who obviously said what he did was wrong. You had people that came out and said that what he did was wrong, but unfortunately, I think you had a lot of people in the general population, especially that are more right of center, and even some people in the media, in talk radio, and in other areas of influence that weren't really all that upset with it. They really didn't see a problem with that. So it's not okay to assault reporters. So just throwing that out there. That's not okay. That's not cool. It should be condemned by everyone. I'm not saying that it was a bad moral decision to vote for the guy necessarily. I'm just saying that we can't we can't let ourselves become what we say that we're fighting against. So it's wrong for it's wrong for people who are running for Congress to body slam reporters. Just saying. Also, you've got when you had Donald Trump during the campaign saying that he would pay the legal fees of of people that got in trouble for being involved in some sort of violence at the rallies. Stuff like that is wrong. It's not okay to say those kind of things. So stuff like that is wrong. I mean, you can find examples like that of where politics on the right side of the aisle, the conservative side, the Republican side, are sort of crossing the line in some ways. All right, and I think those are two examples. But again, as I've said, to try to compare that to the sort of toxic political rhetoric that is put out by the left in Hollywood, on the college campuses, in the media, by the Democrats, the organized efforts by organizations like MoveOn.org, backed by George Soros, the ultimate supervillain of the world. That fund groups like Black Lives Matter and Antifa to actually incite violence. That's a phenomenon that is exclusively to the left in virtually all reasonable ways. And it's a real problem. It's a real, very serious problem. And this article here from American Thinker goes over some examples of hostility towards President Trump and towards Republicans in general. A partial list of threats against GOP and Trump from Hollywood celebrities. Breitbart lists 15 examples of celebrity calls for violence. A few examples. 1. Kathy Griffin beheads Trump in graphic photo. 2. Madonna, quote, I've thought a lot about blowing up the White House. 3. Snoop Dogg, quote, shoots Trump in the head in music video. 4. Robert De Niro, quote, I'd like to punch him in the face. 5. Joss Whedon, I want a rhino to bleep Paul Ryan to death. Lovely. 6. Shakespeare in the Park stabs Trump to death in performance of Julius Caesar. 10. Rapper YG threatens Trump with F Donald Trump song. 11. Marilyn Manson kills Trump in music video. And again, that was just a sample of the list from Breitbart. And it's just a trend. It's what's, sort of just safe to do. It's just their MO. It's just their standard operating procedure at this point is to hate Trump and hate Republicans and dehumanize them. Of course, you've got the left, people in Hollywood, people, who live sort of the coastal elites, so to speak. These people all live in this sort of bubble, this sort of liberal bubble, where everybody that's around them basically agrees with them and says the same thing, and that's why you've got this sort of parroted response by everybody in these different areas on the far left. And let's not forget actual violence and intimidation that has been carried out against Republicans. From the Daily Caller, even before Wednesday's shooting, Republicans were growing used to being on the receiving end of violence and intimidation amid an increasingly hostile political climate where left-wingers portrayed them as, quote, fascists. One of Virginia Representative Tom Garrett's town halls last month featured a heavy police presence after Garrett and his family were targeted by repeated death threats. Quote, this is how we're going to kill your wife, read one such message. Garrett told Politico, quote, I don't want to die anytime soon. I got stuff left to do, I hope. But when you pull wives and children in, that's not cool. That is putting it mildly. Just days after the Politico article ran, FBI agents arrested a Tuscan Unified School District employee for making violent threats against Arizona Representative Martha McSally. Agents said the 58-year-old Steve Martin left threatening voicemails for McSally, telling the Republican congresswoman that her days were, quote, numbered. Also last month, police in Tennessee charged 35-year-old Wendy Wright with felony reckless endangerment for allegedly trying to run Republican Congressman David Kustoff off the road after a town hall he held regarding the GOP health care bill. If Wright stays out of trouble and abides by the terms of her one-year restraining order, then all charges will be expunged from her record, reported BuzzFeed, which covered the story in sympathetic terms, saying, quote, Wendy Wright can't have any contact with Republican Representative David Kustoff for a year after she chased after him for his vote on Obamacare last month, read the story's sub-headline. After she chased after him, she tried to run the guy off the road because she thought he was supporting a health care bill that is going to, as Bernie Sanders would say, kill millions of people, because he's just a lunatic and spews divisive political rhetoric every day. That's his job. That's just what he does, because he's never actually had a real job, so he just is a career politician making everybody's life a living hell. The same day Wright was charged, police in North Dakota escorted a man from a town hall with Representative Kevin Cramer after the man became physical with the Republican congressman and shoved a fistful of money into Cramer's collar. Very interesting. Some sort of symbolism there, like he gets paid off to the biggest fistful of dollars in his collar. I don't know. So what you've got here is obviously more examples of violence towards Republicans. And just think for a minute, what if the tables were turned? What if it was a Donald Trump supporter who went to that same baseball game but was targeting the Democratic congressman and attempted to kill Democratic congressmen? Imagine the media response. Imagine what the media would say. They would say that it's Donald Trump's fault, that it was because of the divisive rhetoric of Donald Trump that this man did this. They would blame Republicans in general. They would blame conservative talk radio. And they would really be pushing for that narrative. You see it, you saw it with the shooting in Carolina when you had the scumbag Dylan Roof go and kill a bunch of black people in a church. They blamed all Southerners, they blamed white people in general, and it's a sort of trend that you see with the mainstream media. If something fits their narrative, then they will absolutely push for it. They will put it out there. They will make a gigantic story about it. But when it's something like this that doesn't fit their narrative, they have a really hard time doing it, and they stay mainly silent on it because of that. You don't really see the mainstream media coming out at all and saying that this is Bernie Sanders' fault or that it's Rachel Maddow's fault, even though they would do the exact same thing if the tables were turned. And this event, is obviously horrible. This was a horrible event that happened, obviously, Representative Scalise is still in critical condition. It's terrible. But you've got this event is already being politicized. You've got, unfortunately, Democrats that are coming out and trying to use the gun control narrative. They're trying to say that we need to have less guns on the streets because so many people come out and die. The governor of Virginia actually came out right after this event and pushed for gun control and said 93 million Americans die every day from gun violence. Just ridiculous. He was obviously didn't mean to say that, and he corrected himself shortly after that, or was corrected rather by a reporter. But it was just pretty silly. I mean, it just goes to show how the Democrat talking points just just get thrown out there instantly as soon as there's a tragic event of this sort. Of course, the congressmen were probably saved by the fact that there were good guys with guns there, and reportedly it took about 3 minutes or so for the Capitol Police to engage the assailant, Hodgkinson. So that was basically 3 minutes or so that these congressmen were basically being shot at from the outside perimeter of this baseball field. And of course, all these senators were completely unarmed. And it highlights a trend, I think, with these sort of mass shooting or attempted mass shooting events. They almost always, basically do always, I mean, really, there's very few examples or exceptions to this. They almost always happen in gun-free zones, in areas where the perpetrator knows that the victims are going to be unarmed. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to, be able to figure out that if a criminal knows that people aren't going to have guns, newsflash, criminals don't follow laws, so they can actually, still just have a gun if they want to. But with this guy, he actually legally had his gun, and he lived in Illinois, which is a state that has heavy gun regulations. He had to go through, he had to get a permit. He had to, probably go through some pretty extensive, pretty extensive process to actually be able to get that firearm. But he legally obtained it. He legally owned it. The guy did have a history of violence, but he was never actually charged with any sort of a crime. So there are some questions about whether or not he should have actually passed a background check, but again, he wasn't actually charged for anything, but he did have a history of violence. So the real answer, in my point of view, would be to actually allow congressmen to carry firearms, to conceal carry firearms. Now, of course, the left just says that we need to completely get rid of guns, and well, they never openly say that. They say that they're for common sense, gun laws, gun control, when they don't even, they've never actually operated a gun in their life. Most of them, they don't know the first thing about guns. They want to say that they can regulate them, and they'll talk about doing things like getting semi-automatic guns off the streets, and making them less available to people, having stricter background checks and all these things. And I do think there are some areas where gun laws could be improved in some ways. I don't think restricting people's access, law-abiding citizens' access to guns to firearms is the solution. I just don't. It's just, there's no evidence, in my point of view, to support that is a policy that is going to lead towards less violence, because when you look at the most high crime areas, it's areas like Chicago, which is run by Democrats and has very strict gun laws. But it turns out there's still a bunch of guns and there's still a bunch of criminals. So, of course, the gun control debate gets thrown out there instantly. That's just the way politics works. The talking points get thrown out instantaneously, and it's quite unfortunate. But just to kind of prove that the media truly hates Trump, and to sort of show how there's this effort amongst people within the media to try to portray Trump in the worst possible way, and they're doing this knowingly, and of course it's helping to add to the entire crazy, political climate that we live in today, and of course, I'm not trying to say that necessarily, CNN or MSNBC doesn't have a right to say some of the things that they say. They do. It's just that these are organizations that try to say that they are not biased, but it's clear that that's not the case. That's not the case at all. And this article from the Daily Wire really sums that up. If you need proof CNN wants Trump and his supporters assassinated, here it is. In the wake of Wednesday's attempted shooting massacre of dozens of Republican lawmakers, we know for a fact that CNN intends to provoke and inspire this kind of violence, and intends to do so specifically against Donald Trump and his supporters, including Representative Steve Scalise, who was gravely wounded yesterday. We know this for a fact because throughout the years, CNN has admitted that the very behavior the network now aggressively engages in provokes and inspires political violence. Some examples. We know for a fact that CNN believes that symbols as innocuous as crosshairs on a political map can result in a political assassination. We know this because for weeks after 2011's horrific Gabby Gifford shooting, CNN blamed Sarah Palin for this shooting. Palin put usual crosshairs on a political map, a normal practice at the time. And CNN revealed to us again and again that they believed those symbols provoked this assassination attempt. So you had CNN, just like the New York Times, coming out and saying that there was a clear link between Loeffner and Palin. Loeffner, the guy who shot Gabby Giffords. But there was no actual evidence for that. No evidence whatsoever that he even saw that map, again, let alone saw the map, but that it even, influenced him whatsoever. Whereas with Hodgkinson, you had a guy who was a huge super fan of Rachel Maddow and Bernie Sanders, and a guy who came out in his Facebook, posts and said all sorts of anti-Trump stuff, that he's should be taken to prison for treason, which is funny because the penalty for treason is death, so no use taking a dead body to prison. And he one ominous post was basically, it's time to destroy Trump and co. And again, this is a guy who is clearly unstable, had a history of violence, of aggressive behavior, and you've got him being very politically motivated by the rhetoric of people like Bernie Sanders and Rachel Maddow, rhetoric that is very anti-Trump, very anti-Republican, and in many ways, instead of actually focusing on policies and policy details, just dehumanizes individuals or entire groups of individuals by saying things like, if the healthcare bill that the Republicans support is going to kill millions of people. When you say things like that, and you have a platform and you're influential, people get influenced by it. But you're not going to see CNN, like they did with the Gabby Giffords case with Sarah Palin thing, with no proof. You're not going to see them do the same thing to Bernie Sanders or Rachel Maddow, of which there is plenty of proof, plenty of evidence. So just showing the insane double standard. And so, because CNN believes this, we know without any certainty what CNN's intent is when they point what looks like a sniper scope at the Oval Office and then broadcast that symbol worldwide. We know what CNN's intent is when they blast out videos and photos that compare a symbolic political pledge to a Hitler-esque Nazi statue. Yeah, they had Trump waving at people, and they pretended like he was doing the freaking Heil Hitler. I mean, just complete madness. Another example, we know for a fact that CNN believes images inspire political violence. We know this because CNN told us to do so in the wake of the god-awful 2015 church shooting in South Carolina. For weeks, CNN told us the image of the rebel flag provoked this violence. So there you go. They know, or CNN believes that, certain images can provoke political violence, yet they're greenlighting stuff, where there's the image of a possible sniper scope in the Oval Office and comparing Donald Trump to Hitler. Just totally ridiculous. And so, because we know what CNN believes, without any uncertainty, we know that CNN's intent is when they defend, praise, recommend, and stand by their parent company's decision to sponsor an assassination porn play that depicts the bloody murder of President Trump. And again, that is, of course, the adaptation of Julius Caesar in the New York Central Park, that indeed, at the end, does depict the violent death of Julius Caesar, played by a character that strikingly resembles President Trump. Of course, instead of being stabbed by the sort of just average, members of the Senate, in the original story, he gets, the twist this time is that he gets stabbed by a bunch of angry women and minorities, because of course Trump is an evil, racist, sexist, homophobic bigot. We all know that. So, of course, it's okay to stab him to death, therefore. And so, because we know what CNN believes, without any certainty, we know what CNN's intent is when CNN compares Trump and his supporters to the Ku Klux Klan. We know what CNN's intent is when CNN ties Republican Representative Scalise to the KKK. Another example, we know for a fact that CNN believes unsubstantiated and reckless conspiracy theories provoke violence. We know this because in their coverage of the 2016 Pizzagate shooting, CNN told us they believe this. And so, because we know CNN believes this, without any uncertainty, we also know what CNN's intent is when CNN continues to push the false Russian conspiracy. The thoroughly debunked lie that Trump mocked a reporter's disability, and the even more absurd lie that Trump has admitted to serial sexual assault. CNN obviously knows what they're doing. They have an organized effort to try to basically make the president look like the worst possible person that they can. They constantly try to dehumanize him and his supporters by comparing them to the KKK, by comparing them to Nazis. They sort of flirt around with the idea of an actual assassination of President Trump, in different ways. You had Wolf Blitzer on CNN who was interviewing, one of the guys who was friends with this Hodgkinson guy who attempted to kill the Republican congressman. And this guy was saying, oh, he wasn't evil. He just was tired of the politics. And then it goes back to Wolf Blitzer, and Wolf Blitzer just like, well, that's you heard what he said. Basically, didn't push back, against it whatsoever. You got CNN that, you had Fareed Zakaria from CNN that said the Julius Caesar play with Donald Trump being assassinated at the end was, a masterpiece. Of course, you had Kathy Griffin, who was hired at CNN for a short amount of time, or actually for a while. She did the New Year's Eve gig for years with Anderson Cooper, and then they, finally reluctantly fired her after she, did a mock decapitation ISIS style of the president. You also had Reza Aslan, I believe his name was, who had a show on CNN, who called the president a piece of bleep, and then CNN was basically forced to cut off his show as well. But basically, the point is, CNN is nothing but left-wing hack propaganda. That's all it is. It's total fake news. It's just like the New York Times, complete fake news. That doesn't mean they can't say things that are true. That means that they purposefully attempt to lie to people, to deceive people. It's completely shameful, and it's completely against any, just the most basic, version of journalistic integrity, obviously. So, the bottom line, the boil down to all this is, I think the political rhetoric on period just should be toned down. People should be a little bit more careful about the things they say, the accusations that they throw out there, the tweets that they tweet, the things they post on Facebook, all this stuff. I think people in the media, Democrats, people in Hollywood need to understand that if they have a platform and they're influential, the things that they say are going to potentially influence people. This is just a very tense moment in our nation's history, and I think people just sort of calming down a little bit and sort of being a little bit more measured and a little bit more cautious with the things that they say would really, really go a long way. You know, it's a dangerous situation that we're in because we've got a very serious political divide, a very intense political polarization, and if it continues down that road and continues to intensify, it can't lead to a positive outcome. So, you know, there's no point in pointing the blame at any one individual like Bernie Sanders or Rachel Maddow, but I think we can all recognize that the political climate is at a level that has crossed the line in many ways. And I think across the board, people should just be a little bit more careful and a little bit more thoughtful. That being said, of course, you can't, in my point of view, compare the sort of rhetoric that could potentially lead to violence or does lead to violence from the Republican side, the conservative side, to the sort of violence and violent rhetoric that is, you know, perpetrated by the left and by the Democratic establishment, by Hollywood, by the college campuses, and just by the mainstream media, of course. You've got, in these institutions and organizations, you've got a concerted effort to undermine the president, to dehumanize the president, conservatives, and anybody who supports the president. And you've actually got organizations like MoveOn.org that fund groups like Black Lives Matter and Antifa to go actually start riots and cause violence. Okay, that is an intensity and a level that is, you know, solely a phenomenon of the far left. And I think everybody on the political spectrum should recognize that and just do everything that you can to condemn it, to say, to actually want to have discussions with people, because you can't have the view that your political opponent or the person who has political views that differ from you is an evil person. If that is your point of view, then there is no room for conversation. And that's what needs to happen. People need to come together. We need to have spirited debates about ideas, about different policies, different principles that we have, and we can figure out what is best for all of us as Americans, because at the end of the day, we're all Americans. So, you know, I think that's something that we should all try to remember. So with that, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please subscribe, please leave a comment. I will have the audio version of this uploaded on SoundCloud, and you can follow me on Twitter or like me on Facebook, and I'll have the links for all that in the description. So I hope you have a wonderful day, and as always, may the force be with you.